This podcast is brought to you by the American Enterprise Institute.
If you like what you hear, please subscribe, rate, review, and share.
Thanks for listening. Here's our show.
What in the hell's going on?
What the hell is going on?
What the hell is going on?
I don't know what the hell he's talking about.
You don't have to know what the hell is on it.
What the hell's the matter with these guys?
We don't know what's going on.
What the hell's going on?
Who in God's name knows what it's all about?
Hi, I'm Danielle Pletka.
And I'm Mark Thiessen.
Welcome to our podcast, What the Hell is Going On? Mark, I love this name all the more now that Donald Trump has returned to us. What the hell is he doing now?
Well, first of all, the thing we have to talk about, we have to have a conversation here, Danny. Are we going to bring our old intro back? Are we going to keep this one, or are we going to go back to the all Trump that the famous Alexa came up with?
Oh, gosh. I
like
like
a
the
great
current
intro.
one.
It was.
I know.
I think you know what we should do for the next couple of weeks? We should go back and forth and use the different one. Like next episode, do the all Trump one, and then let our listeners vote on it and tell us what they think.
Okay. I like the mixed one personally because there's so much Democratic what the hell as well. Let's be honest.
That's true. Maybe Ben can come up with a hybrid because we won't need Biden's voice in there anymore.
Yeah, Ben is going to quit soon. There's no question about that. And no, we won't need Biden. So let's talk a little bit about the Constitution.
Yes.
What is that document anyway? Why does it matter? All it's there to do is tie the hands of our legitimately elected presidents who are making America great again, right?
Exactly. So Donald Trump's transition team has come up with a scheme that they are trying to do, which is to get Congress to go out of session into recess and allow them to appoint their entire cabinet and all the officials into recess appointments without Senate confirmation, without any scrutiny, and allow them to serve 2 years. They just want to get the ground running and make that happen. If the Senate doesn't want to go along with that, they're talking about using Article 2, Section 3 of the Constitution, which holds that in the event of a dispute between the House and Senate over whether to recess, the president could put Congress into recess and then do the maneuver I just described. So even if John Thune, as his first act as the new majority leader, doesn't choose to eviscerate the Senate's advice and consent power as his first official act, Donald Trump can do it for him.
Yeah. Donald Trump, this is a bad idea.
Yes.
Don't do this.
Yes. As people who both, and I would think I can say this fairly, as two people who want him to have a successful administration and to succeed, I think it's very important to say that at the outset. This is not a never Trump, not Trump piece of advice. This is from both of us want the Trump administration to succeed. This, as they say in The Mandalorian, this is not the way.
Yeah, this is not the way. And look, I was really impressed with the discipline that I saw in his campaign. He had a few moments where he went kind of off the rails, and let Donald Trump be Donald Trump. But now that he is in the position of president-elect, it is really important that if he wants to be a revolutionary, and I think he really does, and I think there's room for that. I think there's room to be a revolutionary on energy policy. I think there's a room to be a revolutionary on the bureaucracy that characterizes America, on education, on so many things, on immigration. I think there's so much, but all the more reason to do it in a way that is procedurally kosher. All you end up doing is making yourself and your legacy temporary. You end up being the further banana republicization of the United States, where our laws and our policies relate not to the nation and the nation's interests, but to the person who's in office. And Donald Trump should have learned that lesson last time, and he should listen to me, Danny Pletka, right now and say, you know what? I want to be a revolutionary, and therefore I'm going to do things according to Hoyle, according to the rule book, because I want my people to have the absolute utmost credibility to the American people when they freaking upend everything.
So I think Trump's legacy depends on his revolutionary actions being lasting and enduring beyond his presidency. So he starts the presidency, his second presidency, as a lame duck, right? He can't run again. And so I don't think he's going to govern as a lame duck. I think that he's got a 53-seat majority in the Senate. So this is not like he has a 60 votes requirement to get these people through, and it's Democratic obstructionism that's going to block him. He's got a majority in the Senate, and as long as he nominates people who can get approved by a 53 vote majority in the Senate, he's going to get them confirmed, and they're going to be put in power, and they're going to execute his policies in the commensurate revolutionary way. If he does this and he installs people in this way, and let's say gets reversed by the Supreme Court, then everything they've done has been called into question. And everything they've done can be reversed. And people can resist them within the bureaucracy. You're going to give a pretext to the resistance in the Justice Department and other places for this. And it could make a lot of his accomplishments and his policies temporary rather than permanent. So I think it's a huge mistake from that perspective as well.
I agree. And I really, I know he doesn't trust these institutions for the same reason that the American people put him in office, right? Because they don't trust these institutions either. But if he's going to have an impact, then he needs to go about the actions that are needed in a methodical way. And that's really what I'm not seeing. What I'm seeing is sort of amateur hour. And I know there are he's nominated a bunch of really good people. I mean, I spend a lot of time just sort of laughing to myself about the arrival of Elise Stefanik at Turtle Bay in
That's
New
going to be
York.
so awesome.
Right. It is going to be awesome. And she and her people are serious. They're doing hard work. They're really prepping for this. And I want them to be the legitimate representatives of the American people, so appointed by the President of the United States and the Commander-in-Chief. I look at someone like Tulsi Gabbard, for example, who has spent the last 4 years spouting Russian origin conspiracy theories. And I worry about the fact that she's DNI. Sure, DNI doesn't have a really important job, and we can make excuses. But why, Donald Trump, would you want your representatives to not be people who have a lot of weight, have a lot of oomph, and instead are all the time worried about the monkey on their back, which is the bad choices they've made in their lives? I just don't get it.
Well, here's the thing. So if you can't get your nominees through a 53-seat majority in the Senate, then maybe they weren't good choices to begin with. And I think almost all of the picks that Trump has made up until now, with the exception of Gabbard and Gates,
RFK.
And RFK Jr., it'll be interesting to see. But most of the other picks he's made are going to sail through Senate confirmation and go into action. I love Doug Burgum as both the Secretary of the Interior and also sort of an energy czar running a National Energy Council to sort of revolutionize energy policy. I mean, there's so many good things that are going on here, and everybody's focused on the Matt Gaetz situation. And look, here's the thing. I don't think Gaetz has got a snowball's chance in hell of being confirmed by the Senate. RFK Jr., I don't know. But this is why you have the confirmation process. Look, if he can come up and defend his record and answer questions and convince skeptical senators to support him, then he wins confirmation. If he can't, then he won't. And, same with all the other nominees. So I think that there's a reason why the founders put this system in process, the system of checks and balances, and you need to let the system work because it benefits the president in the long run.
Exactly. Anyway, we need to talk a little bit about the Constitution because it's important that people understand just how not workable these ideas are. And, look, I think it's legitimate for any leader to say, if Congress isn't going to move my nominees, I'm going to use the tools available to me. But they have to be legal tools, and Congress has to already have articulated a desire not to go through that process. As it is, the president has a Republican Senate. That's not going to be the case. So we asked our favorite guy, John Yoo, to come and help us understand the provisions of the Constitution that the president has been talking about using to appoint his nominees. John is the Emanuel Heller Professor of Law at the University of California at Berkeley. He is a non-resident senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. He is a visiting fellow at the Hoover Institution in Stanford University. He clerked for Justice Clarence Thomas. He was the general counsel of the Senate Judiciary Committee. He was the former head of the Office of Legal Counsel in the Justice Department. He knows whereof he speaks.
Here's our interview. John, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you. Long-time listener. What is this, 5th time caller?
Yes, you are one of our favorite recidivist guests. We love having you on because you are so good, in addition to being a brilliant legal mind, so good at explaining these complicated legal and constitutional issues for slow learners like me and Danny, and not our audience, but certainly the two of us.
And I don't charge you an hourly rate either. That's what's so crazy about all this.
You are providing your legal services for free, which is what we like. That's the price I'm willing to pay. What is the old phrase? Like, I'll give you my advice for free, and at that price, it's worth every penny.
Yeah, exactly. You know it.
But your advice is worth a lot. So walk us through so there's this scheme being discussed for Donald Trump to appoint his entire cabinet using Article 2, Section 3 of the Constitution, which allows him to, in a dispute between the House and Senate, he can put the Senate into recess and then appoint whoever he wants, and then they can serve for 2 full years. This has never been done before. Explain the theory behind it, how it works, and why you think it's a bad idea.
Guys, thanks for having me back. I always love, and I listen to all the episodes, so I expect the usual promotional materials and advertising across all multimedia spectrums for my appearance today.
We will do it.
It's great to be with you guys.
AEI, John, so they won't spare any expense.
Well, in a way, we're just like giving the listeners kind of a glimpse of what it's like when we have lunch together in the AEI dining room.
That is exactly
except
right.
we don't have any of the interns to go bring me free food and drink. This is exactly what it's like. So,
exactly.
So I assume we'll talk later about why it would, the policy of it, whether it's a good idea or bad idea to use this power.
Yeah, but let's just let people understand it.
Yeah, so it's actually 2 provisions of the Constitution. One that's never been used before, one that's been heavily litigated, and because of President Obama's abuse of it, called on the Supreme Court to stop him, just about 10 years ago now. So there's 2 clauses having to do with appointments without the Senate. So normally, the Constitution requires, and the Federalist Papers talk about how the founders gave the president the power to nominate, and the Senate has to give its advice and consent to basically the most important officers in the government. Principal officers, primarily, we think cabinet officers. But the founders, right, this is the day of horses and sailing ships and handwritten letters. The founders realized that the Senate would not be in session all the time. Right? So they have a clause, Article 2, Section 2, which says that when there's a recess of the Senate, the president has the power to fill up vacancies. And those appointments are just as good as if you've been advised and consented to, but you can only hold the power till the next session, so about a year. And our friend, former AEI friend, John Bolton, was appointed by President George W. Bush as a recess appointment in this way. That's been regularly used. And as I said, President Obama abused this power, and there was a case that went all the way to the Supreme Court about this, and the Supreme Court only decided 5-4 with the conservative justices in the minority. There were conservative justices, and I'll explain a little bit more about this later, who didn't think President Obama could use this power. Okay, so the new thing that Trump has said, this clause has never been used before. Most people didn't even know it was in there. This is in the next section. And it basically says, when the House and the Senate disagree about adjourning, the president can adjourn the Congress, which would effectively create a recess. So no president, as far as we know, has ever used this power. But what Trump's transition team is floating out there is that, say, Speaker Johnson says we want to go to adjournment, and Majority Leader Senator Thune and the caucus don't want to go in adjournment. That's a disagreement. And then President Trump could say, I adjourn Congress, and now I'm going to make 1,000 recess appointments. That's what the Trump team's talking about.
Let's talk a little bit about the mechanics for a second before we talk about the morality and everything else. So this is actually a little bit complicated as an operation. Okay, so because the House and Senate don't disagree on adjournment, Right. This is not a thing that happens. What we have is we have an adjournment resolution that gets passed by the Senate, and then the Senate sends it over to the House, and the House passes it. You can also do it the other way around, right? You can also do an adjournment resolution from the House, and it gets sent over to the Senate. The Senate takes it up. There are two times when you have what's called sine die adjournment, right? And that is at the end of the session, right? So sine die is these new members of Congress that were just elected, sorry, not you, Bob Casey, will go from January 4th of 2025 until some point probably in December after their lame duck session of 26. That Congress will adjourn, okay? It will go out what we call sine die. At that point, all the business that is being concluded by that Senate will have concluded, and House. In other words, nominations that have been sent by the president to the Congress will need to be resubmitted. Ditto for pieces of legislation, they will need to be reintroduced. So things do not go. So that's one kind. But then there are these temporary recesses where members of Congress go home. How does Donald Trump find that moment of disagreement? Or is the mechanism he's thinking he's going to use that Mike Johnson, the incoming Speaker of the House for the next Congress, does a motion to adjourn, and then he gets the Senate, Senator Thune, who'll be the majority leader, to agree that he's not going to agree to it. How does this happen without the quiescence of the two leaders?
So once again, Danny has enrolled for the graduate school seminar without letting the slower ones of us go through the undergraduate class first. Because she actually went right. No, you've gone right to the difficult constitutional question, which is, can you actually even have a recess during a session of Congress at all? Or do you have to wait for the And Justice Scalia agreed with you. Justice Scalia actually thought you could only have a recess at the end of the year. So I hope listeners realize you've got three old Senate hacks here talking, right? We all were aides in the Senate. This is so interesting, Tess. It may not be, but it matters. It matters now and then.
Helms and so this question,
yeah. Well, those two guys, Helms and Hatch, I don't think they were hanging out a lot together in the cloakroom. But so look, Danny's exactly right. So the one thing we know is a recess, for sure, is when. So people may not realize when you look at a Congress, they would call it like, say, the 104th Congress. That is because each Congress is a 2-year period that's key to the election for the House. And then within a Congress, say the 104th, which was the Gingrich Congress, that's why I always think of it this way, the first year is called the first session, and then the second year is the second session. And so we know for sure that a recess is between those years, because you go out of business and then you end the session and then you start. And everyone says for sure there's a recess there. In fact, it's so funny. Teddy Roosevelt, who loved the idea of recess appointments too, Congress didn't want him to do recess appointments, so they ended 1 year and started another year with 1 second in between. And Teddy Roosevelt appointed 50 people in that millisecond. They're called the millisecond recess appointments of Teddy Roosevelt. It's great because he said there has to be a time that existed between those 2 years. Okay, so Justice Scalia, for example, with Justice Thomas, Justice Alito, and Chief Justice Roberts, believe it or not, have said in an opinion from 10 years ago, that's the only kind of recess that exists. You can't have a break during the year. If that's true, then Donald Trump's proposal is going to totally collapse. And that's also why whatever he does, whatever Trump does, whatever he does with Gates, you're going to go to the Supreme Court. Because I actually could see easily 5 or 6 justices now agreeing. All the people who are in the majority in that case, I think only one of them, Justice Kagan maybe, no, 2 of them, Justice Sotomayor and Kagan, are still on the Supreme Court. Everybody else is gone. So look, Danny's right. Now the question is, if you believed, as the majority in this case from 10 years ago thought, it's called Noel Canning versus NLRB for those who are interested, because President Obama was recess appointing people left and right. Can you have a break in a meeting of the Senate during a year. And so presidents have said, yeah, if they go on a break, like they go home, you guys know the Senate will go take a break for a few days so everyone can go home and campaign.
August recess.
Yeah, August recess, you take 2 weeks off, 3 weeks off. Is that actually enough of an adjournment to allow the president to start recess appointing? So the Supreme Court majority 10 years ago, which I'm not sure this current court would agree with, they said the Senate has to be out for at least 10 days. If the Senate goes out for 10 days, they're not in session for 10 days, not meeting, let me put the wrong word, session. They're not meeting for 10 days, then the president can start making recess appointments. But what has never happened, is Danny's point, is how is it that the House and Senate would disagree? The Senate just decides when it's in and out, and the House decides when they're in and out. They don't have to be in meeting or not at the same time. That actually reinforces Scalia's view, that it's really about ending the... But no, so here's how I would do it if I were the Trump guys. I would say, okay, Speaker Johnson, pass a concurrent resolution, which means both houses have to agree that we're going to all go into a real recess for X amount of time, and then expect the Senate not to agree. Never been done before, as Danny says. And then President Trump will say, that's a disagreement on adjournment, and I'm declaring a adjournment Congress, and now I get to make recess. And I'm going to make the recess 2 weeks so I can basically get not just Matt Gaetz, but he's going to, as you guys know, there's thousands of other advice and consent people who have to go through. And if Trump were smart, and I just don't know why he's not doing it this way, he should actually say, I'm going to use this power to put in place all these junior people who the Senate takes forever on, and they won't get nominated, they won't get appointed for a year, and the government can't work. I can't engage in the effort to attack the deep state unless I have every assistant secretary of state in there working. But instead, he's going to use it for these
have to name them
cabinet
first.
officers. Yeah.
The Supreme Court case that knocked Obama down was pretty simple because he put in this guy from the Consumer Protection Bureau, whatever his name was, and so and the guy started instantaneously making decisions, and so one of the parties that was impacted by his decisions brought suit. That's how it ended up at the court. How does this end up at the court as a systemic matter? In other words, let's say Donald Trump does what you suggest. Okay, he does this. He gets them to disagree. He puts them out for 2 weeks. Does a member of the Senate have standing to sue the president on that?
That's a great point. So here's, first of all, this shows actually the danger of reading the provision this broadly, because if this were true, Trump could say, I'm putting you out of session for a year.
Right.
Which was actually one thing the founders, when you look at this provision, I looked it up in the Federalist Papers. I don't think people have talked about this yet in the public debate. This was represented as a restriction on the presidency because the king in England could cancel the parliament for years. If he felt like it.
Right.
Yeah. And so actually when Hamilton talks about this provision, he says, this is probably never going to be used much, but this is to make clear that the president can't prorogue the Congress or the Senate. It's very interesting. But no, here's how it would come up. So this is an excellent question, but this goes to the core of my view why this is actually a bad idea for Trump, is because, okay, you put Matt Gaetz in office. Matt Gaetz theoretically approves every federal prosecution in the country, every federal investigation, every lawsuit by the Justice Department. So anything the Justice Department does while Matt Gaetz is the recess-appointed Attorney General is constitutionally questionable. Every defendant will say, I'm being prosecuted by an illegal Justice Department. Every time and I know Mark gets thousands of subpoenas a year, so this is a good get-out-of-jail-free card for Mark. Mark can say, I don't have to obey the subpoena to appear and testify or to be a witness because it's issued by a Justice Department that's headed by an illegal officer. Every single decision of the Justice Department for however long it takes, this would take probably a year. And so that's one. Second, so all those people will challenge it, right? Every single witness and defendant in a Justice Department lawsuit will challenge this. But second, here's even the better one. And this is why it also, I think, really hurts Trump. Suppose you're someone who works at the Justice Department, right? Suppose you're a civil servant or an officer. and Matt Gaetz wants to fire you or reassign you, right? Because he wants to, right? Trump wants to reform the Justice Department. You just say, no, I won't do it. You're an illegal officer. I don't have to obey you. I'm going to keep suing everybody to force, voting districts that Biden likes, right? Until someone who's really the attorney general tells me to stop. Those could all be the product of, those can all produce litigation too. But think about it. The year or two that it will take to resolve all those cases will stall any effort to change this. In fact, if I were like a never Trumper burrowed into the FBI and I wanted to stall Trump's reforms, I couldn't ask for anything better than this.
So our friend Ed Whalen makes the argument that you can't do this play that we were talking about where the Speaker of the House does a concurrent resolution and the Senate refuses, and therefore that's a dispute. He says that because he says, I'm just going to quote what he says here, the Constitution doesn't prefer to confer authority on either house to take a position on whether the other adjourns. He says the only provision that bears on this is Article 1, Section 5, which provides, quote, neither house during a session of Congress shall, without the consent of the other, adjourn for more than 3 days, unquote. So he's basically saying that under Article 1, Section 5, the House has no say over the Senate's decision whether to stay in session. The authority only kicks in when the Senate wants to adjourn. So if the Senate has complete authority whether to stay in session or not. What do you think of that argument? That the Constitution you can't force the Senate to adjourn against its will.
We don't know because this provision has never come up before. We're all just reading the text of the Constitution. And so if I were Trump, I would say therefore, you've just read out of Section 3 of Article 2 the idea of case of disagreement between the House and Senate over time of adjournment, right? Because if you're right that neither House nor Senate can really force the adjournment of the other, right? Which seems like a reasonable reading of the Constitution, then how can they ever disagree over the time of adjournment? So Trump would say, you've just read that provision, although it's never been used, you've read it out of the Constitution. It doesn't make sense otherwise, unless there can be some way for the House and the Senate to disagree.
Well, I mean, but the fact, Trump is not the first person to hate the confirmation process. He's not the first person to hate this.
And he won't be the last.
And he won't be well, of course, this is something I want to talk to you about after, which is the what goes around comes around problem that seems never to occur to these people. But the selfsame Ed Whalen noted that there have been 3 cabinet officials recess appointed since 1900. And the circumstances in which those cabinet officials were recess appointed were completely unique. In the one case, the Commerce Secretary was killed in a plane crash. Congress was not in session. The president went to Congress and said, I'd like to appoint somebody in the interim since you're not in session. And Congress said, that's absolutely fine.
And that was Mickey Cantor, who had previously been confirmed for another position.
And he had previously been confirmed for another position.
Can I just throw in, so the Supreme Court, if people are interested, they should really look at this Noel Cannon case from 2014. It really is 10 years ago, because it goes through the history of this. And so that's true, but there's a lot of interesting people who were recess appointed who I think all of us would say that's probably a good idea. So Eisenhower was made a major general as a recess appointment by FDR. Truman appointed Dean Acheson as Undersecretary of State. Actually, maybe these weren't such good ideas. And then the other one was George H.W. Bush made Alan Greenspan chair of the Fed as a recess appointment. So Ed's right. Cabinet level, yes. But there have been significant people who have gotten their recess appointment. And also, I would say Supreme Court, too. I think Chief Justice Warren and maybe even Justice Brennan were initially recess appointed. But I think that was more in keeping with the purpose of it, which is Eisenhower wanted the Senate to vote on them. They were just not meeting when he needed them to get in their job, so he put them in their job. But none of them were using it, and this is really the point, I think, of the Federalist Papers, is this was never being used as an end run around the Senate. The whole purpose of this provision, again, in a day of slow technology, was the Senate's not going to be around all the time, and the president needs someone to fill these jobs right away for some purpose. And so they're going to be temporary. But if you really want them to have the job, the president will want the Senate to eventually vote on them.
Right, so that they would be there for the breadth of his term. But there's another point here that I don't think we've talked about, which is that you talked about the lower level employees. Why can't the president simply also fill all vacant judgeships?
Well, he could, right?
Oh,
Right?
no. Think about this. So remember, this is also really weird about the judgeships for the executive branch versus executive branch, because the recess appointments, the commission expire at the end of the next session. So actually, it would suck to be a judge, or maybe it'd be fun. You're just a judge for a year. I have to say, I'll tell you guys this. I don't think I've ever mentioned this to you, but during a previous Republican administration, I was approached to be a recess appointment judge to the Ninth Circuit. And they're like,
Oh my
just
God.
go. Yeah, they just said,
Oh, that would have
just
been
go
so
out there
cool.
go there for a year. And they were like, and just just make them all go insane. And then you can leave. And I was like, I was tempted. That was a really cool idea. But anyway, so this is the thing though. If you accepted this approach to appointments, you would actually really change fundamentally the balance of power between the executive branch and the Senate in the appointments process. Because Danny's right, like you guys are right. If Trump does this, then every president at the beginning of their term will spark the disagreement and they will recess appoint every executive branch officer, whatever it is, like 2,000 people for the most important positions in government. And if you're like Trump and you don't expect that you were going to fire most of them after a year or two anyway, you have effectively, right, kicked the Senate out of the appointments process. Even down from, right, the Secretary of Defense all the way down to the Assistant Secretary for Policy in the Defense Department.
But also during that period, imagine he does recess appoint all these judges. Just like the situation you described with Gates would be on steroids with the courts. Like every decision by every one of those courts that you have a recess appointed judge on could be reversed on the basis of that it was an illegitimate court. And every defendant or every person petitioning before those courts could just say, I don't have to follow your orders. You're an illegitimate court.
To me, it seems using it for the judiciary is a bad idea because the president does want those judges that he appoints or she appoints to be there for, right, the normal term, which is the rest of their lives. So, using this recess appointment for judges, I think doesn't make sense for any president. But you're right, Mark. If you did do that, then every case that judge participated in would be questioned and could be doubted. Now, this is the problem with the recess appointments and this is why Scalia and the conservatives like this idea, it's only in between years, is because we also don't know, like, how long does the recess have to last? Like, what if it's just for one day? Does that mean the president can jam all those people in? The Supreme Court said it has to be 10 days. And Scalia's like, where'd you get this 10-day figure from? Like, why does that matter? Why isn't it 20 days? There's no way to draw a clear line about what a recess really is.
And then what would happen if let's say he installs Gates in as Attorney General. Right now, Gates doesn't appear to have the votes to be confirmed in the Senate.
This is probably the only way that Gates
he
could
appoints
get into
him,
the
and then
job.
the Senate, after the Senate is allowed to come back into session, the Senate votes him down.
Yeah, this was an idea I had because if Gates is recess appointed and the Supreme Court eventually agrees with Trump on this reading of the Constitution, then Gates is only Attorney General to the end of the next session. He's only Attorney General for 2 years. So what can the Senate do in response? So there's a variety of things, we all know that the Senate can do to really screw over the executive branch, like cutting funding, why should the Senate confirm any other official in the Justice Department won't cooperate? But here's the interesting thing. I think politically, what Mark says is an interesting idea. Go ahead and have the confirmation hearings anyway. Go ahead and have a committee vote and a floor vote anyway, and deprive anybody appointed in this way of any kind of political legitimacy. Right? You may not win, the defendants may not win their cases if this is considered a legitimate recess appointment, but it'll be impossible to reorganize the Justice Department. No career official is going to listen to this guy. They'll say, you were just voted down by the Senate. I'm not going to take your orders. Fire me if you want to, get rid of me, but I'm not going to listen to you, right? And he would have like zero political credibility. Again, setting back the cause of reform of the Justice Department and the FBI.
Right. No, it's the whole thing is batshit. Let's be honest. I want to talk about just Andy McCarthy wrote a really good piece on this yesterday, and he said, one of the things I always said about January 6th was that the constitutional guardrails held. He said, and I'm hoping that that's going to be the case, but this is definitely an attempt to run roughshod over the Constitution. Now, about these candidates themselves, let's talk about not the Constitution. Let's just talk about process, right? What you and Mark and I know is that when someone is nominated, before their nomination is sent, so the president announces it, but he usually doesn't announce it for a while, but he also does a background check, right? Because these people hold security clearances. Unless you are mentioned in the Constitution specifically, you are subject to a security check to get a security clearance. Only the president, the vice president, and several others can have an automatic security clearance without a background check. They're not doing background checks on anybody. Is that what you said, Mark?
Yes.
They're not doing FBI background checks.
Yes,
Are they doing
they're-
CIA background checks, or are they just using some guy
They're talking about using private investigators.
So they're geting some guy that Donald Trump
Magnum
found in
PI.
Miami, right?
Magnum PI, minus the mustache and the Ferrari.
Tom Selleck is going to be vetting everyone.
Magnum PI.
Actually, that's not a bad system.
I love Magnum PI. That would
yeah,
work. Okay.
exactly.
All right. So for reals now, we are actually talking about having people who may not be vetted at all getting these nominations and then being recess appointed. Is that correct?
So this is, as I understand it, Mark's right that the transition is hiring private investigators to carry out the background checks. And that's why we're starting to see things pop up left and right. Because how's a private investigator have access to all the things the FBI knows, most of which are confidential and secret, or the things that the Senate knows? Like I've said, are they just running the credit scores of this guy? And if they ran the credit score of Matt Gaetz, do we think it's really above 600 out of 900? I mean, come on.
Not a
He probably
chance.
can't get a used car loan right now. But in seriousness, that's why you're seeing problems not just with Gaetz, but also with Pete Hegseth, right? You're seeing things now that would have easily come up in any FBI background check, but which apparently the transition didn't know about when they nominated him.
They seem to be moving too fast. Like they're not vetting the people with internally. They're not vetting people with the Senate to see if they have support. It's just basically, we won, we have a mandate, and you do what we tell you, and consequences be damned.
Look, I can see their side of things because the FBI, right, did
It's
try to
corrupt.
bring Trump down in 2017. And so I could see why they're distrustful of the FBI. But, right, this is a different part of the FBI, right? The people who do the background investigations are, I mean, you've probably been interviewed and gone through it. I have too, for the classification clearance. And this is not the same people who are cooking up, right, the Russia hoax scheme. These are, often long-term FBI civil servants who are, right, they're just trying to compile a file to make sure there's nothing in your background that the Russians or the Chinese could blackmail you about. These are probably the agents who probably voted for Trump, right? These are not the agents, who are working, working at headquarters with Jim Comey, trying to bring Trump down. So I totally get why the transition is suspicious of the FBI, but they think of it all as just sort of like one, just one organization against him when it's just a gigantic agency.
So I still want to talk about the implications of this. So, okay, we've talked about this. He does it. He goes ahead. Let's say he finds it. He gets the Senator Thune and Mr. Johnson to play ball. He recess appoints all of these questionable nominees. And by the way, if you're Marco Rubio, your view on this has got to be, no, could you please nominate me? Because,
Exactly.
I'd really like to be a legitimate kind of a player here. Same for Elise Stefanik, right? We've got a bunch of Democrats, Senator Fetterman and others who say, I look forward to confirming these people already. And so they would be confirmed. And yet we are in a position where, the president wants them in place already so they don't, to deny them that legitimacy. But let's say he goes ahead with all of this. Then we have an election in 2028, and assuming he doesn't decide to call that off as well, which I think would be even more difficult than this particular maneuver, we have an election in 2028. We elect, I don't know, Gavin Newsom.
Well,
Just-
at least
just-
California would improve
That's true.
because
That's
we'd be
their-
kicking
that's-
him the hell out.
I was about to say that's your strategy now, is it, to get rid of Gavin Newsom? So Gavin Newsom is our president, and he says, I want to put Elizabeth Warren on the Supreme Court. I want to put Rashida Tlaib in charge of the State Department. I want to put AOC in charge of the Pentagon, right?
Yeah.
He goes
Yeah.
ahead, correct?
Yes, in fact, that's what people should ask themselves. If you were in favor of good government, but if you were a conservative, who do you think is going to make most use of this recess appointment power in the end? I think it's whoever wants to appoint the most radical people who could not get through the Senate. I think over time, that's going to be progressives, right? They're the ones who want to engineer big change through the government and want to put ideologues in, is like all the people you mentioned. In fact, Senator Warren's a good example. President Obama wanted to make her head of the Consumer Finance Protection Board, but couldn't get the votes. Why does he need the votes now? He could have just put her in then.
Well, it's sort of like the filibuster. It's like the Democrats are rediscovering, after threatening to get rid of the filibuster so they pass through their agenda, all of a sudden the Democrats love the filibuster right now. Right? They've
Exactly.
rediscovered the virtue of requiring 60 votes in the Senate to get anything done. It's the same.
You don't hear a lot of Senate Democrats praising Harry Reid these days for
Nope.
getting rid of the filibuster for judges.
Yeah,
Because then
no, it's
Senator
exactly
McConnell turned around and said, well, we're not going to have filibuster for Supreme Court nominations either.
But that brings us to another point, which is you brought up the John Bolton case. The reason Bolton was recess appointed is because the Democrats were filibustering him, because back then you needed 60 votes to get any executive appointment confirmed. It's not just judges that he got rid of it for. Harry Reid got rid of it. He got rid of it for all executive appointments. So now you just need a simple majority. So if Donald Trump has a 53 seat majority in the Senate, if
Yeah,
you can't
why
get
are
your
you
people
fighting?
through that, then, it's not even, you don't even have to get bipartisan support for your people. You just need to get all the Republicans lined up. If you got somebody who can't jump through that hoop, they probably shouldn't be in the job.
I totally agree. This is not a tool you would need if the same party controls the presidency and the Senate, because the Senate is not going to be holding up nominees for illegitimate reasons, which is what happened, I think, with John, that you had one or two senators basically just holding him up out of personal spite. Here, the Senate, John Thune has said, I want to get through and confirm President Trump's nominees with all due dispatch, right? He's saying, I'll be fast. And what's President Trump's complaint with the Senate yet?
Well,
Hasn't even come into, hasn't even, yeah.
They're not going to
They
confirm
hasn't
Gabe.
even, but it's your question that you raised, Mark. Suppose Thune and Senator Grassley, who's going to be the new chair of the Judiciary Committee, they commit to having hearings right away. They have them in January, and they say, we'll vote on you by the end of January. Trump can't complain that the Senate's actually slowed down his nominees or that's out of session and he needs Gates there right away. So that shows, I think, it's more an
Can he
effort.
technically do? So Trump is not president until January 20th. Can he actually nominate people prior to January 20th? I mean, can they have hearings on people? No, right? So that would have to
But
be.
They can have hearings
so
on them even if
the
they're
Senate
not
could have
officially
hearings,
nominated.
yeah, just-
but they can't.
They've
vote.
done
Yeah.
that in the past. You
They
get
just
the
can't have official votes.
yeah.
Right, like
They
the Senate
usually-
can't vote on anyone because the president hasn't officially nominated anyone till January 21st.
Like in our old days, we used to have the Secretary of State confirmed within hours of the inauguration.
Yes, you can do that.
Whoever it
You
was.
can do the hearing part of it, the backgrounds and the hearings, you can do that, just as long as there's no official vote.
But here's another problem, which is, so now that Trump has laid out this theory that he wants to recess appointments, basically what this means is the Senate can never go into recess. Because let's say the
That's been
Democrats
case already. That's
say
been the case already for the last few years.
But let's say Republicans in the majority are having, there's the whatever problem they have. Like, so there's 3 Republicans who are blocking a nominee. The Democrats are trying to block them, and Thune agrees that Trump should recess appoint so and so because of whatever procedural hurdles there are. And so, okay, it used to be the Senate would cooperate with the president, go into recess, let them do the confirmation, and then do it. You can't do that now, because what Trump will do is say, I'm not only doing that, I'm doing 1,000 people. You can't trust him to do. You could even use it strategically in the way it was intended in the past or used in the past.
Yeah. Ever since the Obama effort to abuse his power, the Senate of both parties has stayed in session, what they call
Right.
pro forma session, for
Yep.
years now, and
Right.
doesn't give any presidents the chance to claim this. And the Supreme Court upheld that practice because Obama actually appointed someone and then went and said, the Senate's not really doing anything. Unless they're really doing business, holding votes and so on, having a debate, then it's not a real. So they're really actually in recess. They're just faking it. And the Supreme Court said no. It's up to the Senate to decide what it's going to do when it's in session. And so you lose, President Obama. But because of that, now the Senate, you're right, Mark, the reaction will be to make it even more difficult in the future for the president to use this power when actually he or she needs it.
Okay, let's talk about the Senate for a second. Let's talk about senators. Because when all of us worked on Capitol Hill in the 90s, there was not a chance in hell that our members would have given up their constitutional prerogatives, whether it was to a Democrat or a Republican. Right? No way in hell. The idea that somebody would have been recess appointed without the president actually trying at first, as they did with John Bolton, to get him confirmed, it was only having failed that the president went ahead and did the recess appointment. It wasn't an effort to circumvent the will of the Congress. It was an effort to move ahead when he had failed to be able to get his own nominee. But our bosses, whoever they were, would have basically responded to the Trump initiative and said, I don't think so. Are we going to see the Senate roll over? Are these a new breed of members who are going to be afraid to be primaried? Is that what's going to happen?
I mean, you guys have a better read of it than I do, but I remember those days, yes, because you're a senator. And this is why the founders gave the senators 6-year terms, because the presidents would come and go, but the senators would stay longer. You know, there's this great line, I think it was Thomas Jefferson, who was out of the country during the Constitution ratification, asked Washington why there was a Senate at all. Yeah, I don't know if you ever heard the story. And so
No.
Washington said, oh, it's a great story. Washington had a tea. He was having tea when Jefferson asked this, apparently. And so Jefferson said, you know, our country is like this, you know, the government's like this teacup. Sometimes the tea gets too hot. And so you pour a little bit out and it goes into the saucer and it cools down. And he said, the Senate is the saucer. He said, the Senate is the thing that cools down, right, the craziness of day-to-day politics. And that's why they gave senators 6 terms. That's why they're chosen by the states, not the people. And, right, Danny, there are all kinds of institutional things built into the Constitution to help senators take the right stand on behalf of their institution. You know, James Madison said the Constitution is designed so that ambition will check ambition, that institutions will fight each other to defend their powers. And that's how our separation of powers is supposed to work. If they agree too much, the system is not working. And you're right, Danny, I would worry if senators are so supine that they say, oh, I want to hand over all our institutional independence over to a popular president, whether it be Trump or Obama. It's bad for our constitutional system because then the government can start doing things that the people are actually not in the best interest of the people.
Right.
Yeah. Chuck Grassley is 91 years old. He's never running again, right?
Wow.
Mitch
mean,
McConnell.
Are you sure about
Chairman-
that?
Yeah.
Are you sure he's not running again?
Well, maybe. I don't know. There's the Thurman precedent, of course, but you know, Trump has no leverage over Chuck Grassley, and a lot of these guys who were just elected to 6-year terms, they're going to outlast Trump. You know, he'll be off the
Right.
scene 2 years,
there's
and some of these
Murkowski
guys
and
might say,
Collins.
"I'm just going to retire
Yeah,
in
Murkowski,
4
Collins.
years. I don't need this. I don't need this." I think there's certainly more than 4.
So can we talk about this for a sec? I want to get on the plane with Donald Trump and go into that gross McDonald's smelling chamber.
Hey,
and I want to.
Dan, if you did that, you might be the next attorney general because that's apparently how the last one was chosen.
Yes, I gather that Susie Wiles was not in the room when that choice was made.
Can you imagine Danny on Trump Airways with one hand large fries, other hand Big Mac? I have trouble, but that would be so awesome to see.
I can
like,
imagine
and then-
Steven, because I've seen that. Danny gets
And then
very upset
the
when I
president-
feed
can you
Steven
imagine?
a quarter pounder with cheese occasionally when
Yeah,
we're on vacation.
Danny with the Big Mac in one hand, the large fries, and then Trump saying, "I'd like to make you ambassador to Italy."
Oh, okay. For that, I would eat that burger and fries. Let
Exactly.
me be clear. That is my price. Maybe
Exactly.
Australia. No. So let me ask this question: Who is giving him this craptastic legal advice. He learned a very unpleasant lesson. And I know, notwithstanding the people around him or anything else, I have enough respect for Donald Trump's intellect in this case to understand that people told him a series of lies in 2020, that when those lies got taken to every single court in the land, including courts that were presided over by Trump appointed judges, he lost. Left, right, center, up, down, every direction that exists in this world as we know it, right? So who now is giving him this absolute garbage advice about how to proceed?
I have no idea, but I think, according to reports, the way the transition is working is the way the first term worked. So there were people who thought after the first batch of nominees who were pretty good, oh, Trump's got a more disciplined system and there's a more of a process with short lists and background files. But it sounds like it's just like the first term. All these aides are jockeying for influence, and Trump meets with the wrong person at the right time and then makes a sudden announcement. And that sounds like what happened with Gates. And then they're trying to backfill some kind of theory that would allow him to take office. And that's got to be this recess appointments idea. In fact, it only really seems concocted to help him because, as you guys were just saying, Rubio, people like that, they're all going to want to get a vote. And there's no sign the Senate's not going to let them get a vote. And probably the Senate will confirm almost all of Trump's nominees for major cabinet positions, no matter what we think of them.
This also seems to be counterproductive in another way politically, which is, why does Trump want to get into a confrontation? He just won a 53-seat majority in the Senate.
Yeah.
The Senate that wants to be cooperative, wants to get things through, and he's choosing a confrontation with them, both in this and also in some of the picks he's made. Like, he's got to get them to, he's going to try to use the budget reconciliation to get a bunch of heterodox ideas through, like no tax on Social Security income, which could bankrupt Social Security. There are a lot of conservatives who aren't down with that.
No tax on tips.
No tax on tips may be a little bit less controversial, but there's that it's going to take some more. Some of these things are going to take some work to get a majority through that. Why would he want to blow up his relationships with the newly installed Senate by doing this power grab on them?
Isn't he like a classic general fighting the last war? He attributes the lack of success at the end of his term to the resistance put up to him by the FBI, the Justice Department, Mueller investigation, the impeachments, which he believes leaked by the national security bureaucracy. So I think this kind of makes sense to me, is you would only act this way if you really want to take on the bureaucracy. And so someone like Gates, it's just like giving a middle finger to the whole Justice Department, right? Like, I think so little of you, and I'm going to so change the way the Justice Department and the FBI work that I'm going to put someone like Gates in, right? Someone so outside the range of responsible nominees. That's the only thing that makes sense to me. But you're right, Mark, that's not the war he needs to fight in the future. He's got a lot of support, I think, for an idea of we've got to reform the administrative state. And so he doesn't need to put wild people in charge. I mean, he can put, there are plenty of people he could appoint who are very respectable people who would still carry out a serious reform of the Justice Department or of HHS. Why? And then you're right, it's going to take away from the political capital he has to get his agenda through Congress that he needs to get through.
And on top of that, the Democrats are now, unlike 2016, it's going to take something to rev up the resistance again because they're defeated, right? Like in 2016, they won the popular vote. Trump was illegitimate. He's not my president. He was installed by Putin, Russia, all the rest of that. They went into immediate resistance mode. Right now, they're sitting around trying to figure out how the heck Donald Trump crushed them electorally. And it's an opportunity to reach across the aisle, which I think is his instinct in a lot of times, and try and find some areas to work with them. They support no tax on tips. They support some of these things some of these things are actually quite liberal ideas that many Democrats support. Why would he start out this way instead of trying to reach across the aisle to some of the Democrats to get some things done in a bipartisan way?
Because he's
now we have definitely crossed from anything I know to things that you guys know a lot better than me. Right? I have no idea. I really don't. It doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, no, I agree. I don't think it makes sense either. And I think there are really some good people around Donald Trump. The people who ran his campaign, some of his nominees, I think his family, I think Don Jr. and Tucker Carlson and Matt Gaetz are not and Elon Musk are not the
Laura
right people
Loomer.
to make these or are not the right people to make these decisions. And the thing is, they're just in this for the ride. If Donald Trump is the going to be the president of the United States again. These guys come, these guys go. They are the ones who are ruining his reputation. And yeah, of course, he's ultimately making the decision, but he needs to think a lot harder about who has his best interests at heart for his legacy and for everything else. It is not somebody who was having sex with a 17-year-old or 16-year-old girl and saying, "Oh, I didn't realize she was a minor. I was just too high," which is the Matt Gaetz story.
That's also not a defense to statutory rape, by the way.
Yes. Don't you remember that great Steve Martin routine about not paying the taxes? I did not know. Yeah, no kidding. On the other hand, perhaps you were making bad choices. Yes, I know. Listen, John, God, we're going to have to talk about this more. I don't know whether somebody's going to talk the president off the ledge. I don't know if somebody's going to help him. I also don't know whether this is a really, really Machiavellian head fake. The fact that the press reported that he's actually personally...
Four degrees of chess, right? 4D chess.
Four-dimensional chess.
Four-dimensional chess.
You saw the press reported that he's been personally calling members to pressure them on this, right?
Yes.
That would suggest it's not a head fake.
No, I agree.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Hey, John, before we let you go, I know we've abused your time. Let's talk just very briefly about the Trump cases going forward. What's going on? Is all the legal drama going to disappear now that he's been reelected? And should Biden pardon him?
This is amazing. Trump has run the table. He's a gambler. It's like he's rolled craps 7 times in a row. He has really won lawfare. So we know for sure that the 2 federal investigations, the most serious ones, actually the only ones I think were really valid, potentially valid, the special counsel investigation to January 6th, special counsel investigation into classified documents. The minute the president takes office, he can order those dropped. President Trump can order those dropped, and he can fire Jack Smith. And the reports are that Jack Smith, knowing this, is going to try to issue some final report, which special counsels can do, and then quit. So those cases are over. The New York case, we're in the middle of it right now. President Trump has been convicted by a jury, but he hasn't been sentenced. The trial judge there, who I think made a number of serious mistakes in the case, and some of which include going forward with it after the Supreme Court issued its immunity decision, saying that there were flaws in the New York case. This judge has now been delaying the sentencing, and he's asked for briefing on whether he should declare mistrial and hold another trial. So that case looks like it will not take place during President Trump's time in office. The last case was this Georgia case, which I call the real prosecutors of Atlanta. Because you may remember, we were all transfixed by the testimony about the DA and her boyfriend, who she also appointed special counsel to investigate Trump and paid him an outrageous amount of money. And so that's on appeal. There's never been a real proceeding in that case because Trump has successfully not just brought out all the dirty laundry, but he's got an appeal up in the Georgia courts that the whole prosecution now was infected and flawed by this conflict of interest. And people didn't notice this, but the Georgia appeals court just canceled the arguments in that case, which make people think that they might just summarily fine for Trump. And so I think I would not have predicted this 2 years ago when this all started, but it looks like Trump has defeated lawfare. In fact, I've made the argument that it boomeranged because it actually helped Trump win the primary, and it caused this kind of sympathy for Trump, a rally around the flag, because they thought he was being unjustly persecuted.
So, but Mark and I wrote a piece based on a conversation that we had with you a couple years ago on just this lawfare, in which we suggested that it would be smart for Joe Biden to pardon Trump, because not simply because it was the right thing to do, because some of these cases were truly frivolous and political, but also because it would set things on an even keel for a normal election in 2024. As it was, he didn't do it. We certainly didn't have a normal election in 2024, what with Joe Biden pulling out and installing his crowned Princess Kamala. And so that all went to hell in a handbasket and, in fact, probably helped Donald Trump win. Now, is there any efficacy? Does it help to simply say, look, I want Donald Trump to start with a tabula
clean
rasa
slate.
legally? And does it also enable him to pardon his son, Hunter? Or is it just a moot point at this moment?
I think here's the real systemic problem is once you've launched this lawfare, the only way to stop it is for Trump or Republicans to retaliate against the Democrats, right? The Democrats might say, we're never going to do this again. But why would Republicans ever believe them? So the route that you guys are identifying is one way that Democrats can try to heal the system and say, I will pardon Trump. I will pardon his family to the extent they were being investigated because this whole lawfare campaign was a mistake and we will never do it again. Please believe us. Right? But because we can all agree that the norm should be don't use prosecution to prosecute the former people in power. Don't use prosecution to interfere with the current election. But once the Democrats cross the Rubicon, how do you restore that principle? The Democrats have to do something to show that they can be believed when they say we're not going to do this again. And pardoning Trump would be a good first step in that. In repairing the
and
breach.
I think the two of Trump and Biden had an obviously very pleasant and serious meeting. They talked for 2 hours. They looked pretty chipper, both of them. We know why Joe Biden is chipper, right? Mark and I have said this before. The guy who just cut him off got T-boned by a garbage truck, and so
The gal.
yeah, exactly. So actually, this is a real opportunity to do the right thing. I just, I worry that the signals that Donald Trump has sent with these nominations and this effort to circumvent the Constitution will be something that pushes the Democrats to say, no, we can never forgive him. He could never be forgiven.
Because look what he's done. Yeah.
Yeah.
He's going to
Just look
break
what
all
he's-
the norms anyway.
Right.
I agree.
Yeah. So we'll see. We'll see what happens. But I think it's still a relevant argument. So glad we asked you.
Well, John, thank you so much. You are, as always, as promised, you laid it out for our listeners and laid it out for the slow learners who are hosting the show. So thank you once again for joining us.
Anytime, guys. You wouldn't call me up when things are really going to hell in a handbasket, but I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, well, that's why we're able to call our show What the Hell is Going On?
Okay, Danny, so you and I wrote this piece over a year ago saying Biden should pardon Trump. He didn't listen to us. Should he pardon him now?
And now he must be punished.
And well, he's been punished, all right.
Yeah, that's true. As John explained to us, there's not much legal necessity for President Biden to pardon President Trump for the very simple reason that Donald Trump has beaten this effort at lawfare. I mean, I wish the Israelis were so capable at beating the global lawfare that's being directed at them. But there is a patriotic reason to pardon him, and I think that the case that we discussed with John is really relevant. If we do not want to go through an endless cycle, as the Israelis do, for example, of indicting our leaders because we hate them, right? In ginning up and also pursuing legitimate legal action against these leaders, using every opportunity to take the courts to damage them, to damage their standing. If we don't stop doing that, then the tables will be turned. We'll have the GOP doing its, going after Kamala's family, going after Biden's kids, going after everybody else. And it's just not good for the country. It's terrible when the Dems do it. It's terrible when the GOP does it. And that's the main reason for Biden to say, I'm done with this. Okay. I'm old. I'm not running for anything else. I don't care about my next job. I'm done. I want to clean this up for both our parties and for the country. I want this to end here.
And it's also a chance for him to finally, in his last breaths of his presidency, to actually deliver on the inaugural promise he made to put his whole soul into uniting the country. right? That's what he promised us. And he was more divisive, I would argue, than Trump. He called Republicans who wouldn't pass his election law, compared them to Bull Connor and Jefferson Davis. He said that Trump supporters were garbage, even though he claims to not have meant it. The plain words of what he said were what he said. I mean, go out in style. Unite. And the other thing also, I know this only applies to federal cases. The Georgia case is still hanging there. If Biden does this gives Brian Kemp the green light to do the same thing in Georgia. He could pardon Trump in the Georgia case. We'd have to look and see if the Georgia governor has that kind of pardon power, but most governors do. And just bring this whole thing to an end. I don't think Kathy Hochul will do it, so the New York case will be the only one that's sitting out there, but that looks like it's on fumes as well. Let's just clear the decks and give Donald Trump a chance to be successful. And let's unite the country. I think it's time to do this. It's time to put this whole sad chapter behind us. And maybe in the wake of their electoral drubbing, Democrats might come around. Biden could come around and do something like this.
Amen. And on that note, let us know what you think. Let us know whether you like Mark's many ideas about our intro. Go back, go forward, stand still. We love to hear from you. Take care, everyone.
See you next week. Let us know what topics you'd like us to cover. You can get in touch with the show by emailing us at whatthehell@aei.org.
Or you can reach us on Twitter. I'm at @dpletka.
And I'm at Mark Thiessen. That's Mark with a C.
Please rate and review the podcast. If you like the show, please subscribe, share it, comment on Apple Podcasts, or wherever you're listening to this.
Thanks for listening.